Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Sara Mazer. She's the Federal Chief Technology Officer for LaunchDarkly. Sara, good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And let's get right into it. LaunchDarkly is in the business of feature management. Tell us what that is and where in the development cycle this all applies.
Okay. Feature management is one of the best tools that agencies have to reduce risk. And they're also one of the best new tools for DevOps that Forrester Research has promoted. So what we do is we actually separate code deployments from feature releases. So developers or people in DevSecOps could continually check in their code, and then at some point in the future, then somebody would go in and enable the feature, or it could be the developer or it could be the program manager, somebody non-technical. And so developers are allowed to be a lot more productive because they're not waiting for their colleagues to do some big release. It's more on this continuous integration, continuous deployment spectrum. And the cool thing is that you can actually release a feature and then target a small subset of users first. So our company, like you said, it's LaunchDarkly, but we enable launching features in the dark. So it's like a play on words.
Interesting. So when you say separate the code development from the release of features, doesn't code development add up to a feature ultimately?
Right. It's the development, but you may check it in your code. It might be deployed to production, but then in production, you may not have your go live time until midnight, for example. You want to be ready to go. And if you have dark launched it, you want to maybe even test it in production and then see that before you roll it out to the rest of your user base.
Right, so it's something beyond beta, really, which is another way, but it's already ready for release, but you kind of stage it and then test it and run it through before actually turning it on.
Right, so it's safely testing in production. So testing in production is usually a scary term. Everyone's like, you never want to test in production. But really, with feature management, you can safely test in production because you've limited the access to the feature to a small handful of people first.
Got it. And those people that you mentioned you can target a small set of users, could that be your clients or is it only internal? Or do you have maybe some trusted users of the entire program that you want to test that feature with?
Right. It can be all of the above. So typically you're a developer and you test in your developer environment. Then you would push out to a production environment, but you would only allow yourself to see the feature. Then you might slowly roll it out to your dev team, and so other people could take a look, then maybe your QA team, and then maybe roll it out to people externally that signed up to be part of a beta program. And then you roll it out to everybody once everything has gone smoothly across the line.
All right, but this sounds like a process and not a product. So how do you productize it? What do you offer people to take that process into practice?
So it is a process and a product. So the process part is there's in DevSecOps, there is this concept called CI/CD, or continuous integration or continuous delivery. And so we kind of enable that CD part of CI/CD with those rules. And so you have two components to feature management. You have where you're wrapping the code with some Boolean statements to enable the feature flagging. And the feature flagging is done in a dashboard, and that's like our product. So our product has the dashboard component and some SDK components that work together.
Got it. Okay. And is it language independent? Whatever your development environment is, it'll work in that, whatever people are using?
Yeah, we support the most SDKs in the industry. I think we're up to 26. So that's 26 different languages. All of the major programming languages can be used.
All right. And you mentioned earlier, you touched on the idea that this can enhance cybersecurity development or cybersecurity in the development phase. Explain how that works.
Yeah, so feature management is very in tune with cybersecurity needs. And because you're doing that testing in production, that means that, well, there's two components. There's the rules that are around who can see a feature. And so you may want to test something in production and make sure it works and it's secure before you roll it out to everybody. So there's that concept. And then there's the concept of being able to turn off a feature if something goes wrong. And so if you have an incident, a security incident, for example, let's say you have a database that's as part of your application, and somebody goes onto your website, a nefarious actor, and they found a way to download just a ton of data from that database. And so one of the things you could do is go to the feature management dashboard and turn off that database connectivity flag, and then that feature disappears in like 200 milliseconds for that user. Meanwhile, you don't have to take the whole database down or the whole application down, right? It's just that one feature that's impacted. So it's very minimal disruption to the public that's going to the website. It's just mitigating that one security risk.
Right, because the idea here is that features often cause interactions and dependencies you might not have been fully aware of before turning them on or integrating them, correct?
Sure, yeah. There's certainly some bugs that you won't catch until they're out in production, and hackers have found a way to exploit something.
Well, given the complexity of modern applications and the dependencies and the sheer number of features, you mentioned there's a dashboard and you can see what's going on and cut off that feature in 200 milliseconds. Is there a way to automate that under certain circumstances where you know, like if you see a mass download happening or some other kind of incident you know is rogue, that you can, there's a rule that can stop it automatically?
Yeah, so that's possible. So there are tools out there called SIM tools that look at signals for bad actors, and they support web services. So it's certainly possible for a web service to be triggered to LaunchDarkly or a feature management tool in general, and then that would just turn off a flag. So another very common use case is that we have a customer that manages pizza sales. So in the middle of the Super Bowl, everybody's going to get up and order their pizza at the same time. And they've got tools monitoring the performance of their website. And if there's a certain threshold hit, then that performance monitoring tool sends a message to a feature management tool to turn off all non-essential features of the website so the maximum number of pizzas could be ordered. So it'd be the same in government, right? So if you have open enrollment going in healthcare.gov and a lot of people hit the website at one time, you could have monitoring going on and then turning off some non-essential services to make sure everybody gets to sign up.
Right, so it's a way in some sense of scaling and descaling according to demand. And I guess if your applications are cloud hosted, it's a way of saving cost to keep capacities and traffic that you don't need off and turn it on only when you need it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits with feature management and cost that hopefully we'll get into.
And it's impossible to talk about all of these features and these development environment tools and rules without putting it in the context of the hybrid multi-cloud environment that most federal agencies are, really all of them are operating under. And so you need to deploy this in multiple ways for multiple purposes because of cloud. Maybe describe how the cloud and FedRAMP certification fits in the area of feature management.
Sure. So any agency that chooses a FedRAMP SaaS solution should be more confident that that company has done their due diligence in compliance and governance to make sure that what they're doing is safe in the cloud. So I highly recommend that agencies look at FedRAMP solutions. And I do also understand that although FedRAMP solutions have actually been mandated since 2011, most agencies are not fully compliant, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think they all want to use the best of breed technology, and not all solutions out there are FedRAMPed. It took us 3 years to become FedRAMP. So not 3 years working with the GSA. From our side, we're called a CSP in FedRAMP language. From the time that we made the decision to go for it, then we had to get board approval, and then we had to get the funding and hire internal staff, and then we had to interview 3 POWs, which are the people that help you through the process, and staff up our security team, and then find a sponsor. And so I do also think that it's such an important program. I'm so happy that The FedRAMP reform bill was recently signed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, end of December. And that should make it easier for everybody. It should make it easier for people like us to go through the FedRAMP process, and helps the GSA get their funding that they need to be quicker in their evaluations. But it also should make the federal agencies have an easier time using solutions like us. And I think, as far as I know, we're the only FedRAMP feature management tool out there in the marketplace.
Got it. And you mentioned you are a CSP, cloud service provider.
Right.
And the tool works for people developing locally as well as developing in the cloud?
Yep. You can develop both locally and in the cloud. Our solution runs in the cloud, but people would use their SDKs wherever they're working.
And is there a cost benefit in terms of development and deployment of software associated with good, solid feature management?
Right. There is a ton of cost benefits. So first, as you separate deployments from releases, then that means that ultimately you're able to be more productive, because you don't have these big bang releases that potentially might have an issue that you have to then go back and deal with. And then developers are constantly developing as fast as they can, and they have fewer things that are holding them back. So you just become more efficient to begin with. But then also, when you have that ability to test in production, then you can make sure that it's working in production before you roll it out to everybody. That again makes it less risky in general when you finally do release it to the public. But you also save money because you don't need all of those pre-prod environments anymore, your dev, test, staging, pre-prod, and so forth. You may have a couple still, but you don't need as many as you did before. So there's a tremendous cost savings with feature management.
And we can't have any kind of discussion about software and application development without talking about the zero trust drive.
Right.
We spoke about cybersecurity, secure code, but the zero trust has to do with access. And so when people talk about zero trust, they're talking about limited or most secure access privileges, least privilege offered to not just human users, but also to software agent users. Is that where you fit into that zero trust picture?
So we would never consider ourselves primarily a cybersecurity company, but we do business with the government, and so we need to know where we fit in that zero trust architecture. And there's a lot of different ways where we fit in. So certainly using a feature management tool that has rules to enable or disable access based on the metadata about something. So feature management is all about understanding the metadata about an individual and then making that risk-based decision on whether or not to grant access. So it could be a person or some sort of other entity like a server, an application. And so you can do that with feature management. So you can create those rules. Those rules can be based on anything that your application has available to it. So it could be IP address, email, name, whether they live in Michigan, what they ate for breakfast, literally anything. And so then you build these rules to enable that, that least privilege policy. And so that definitely is one core capability of using feature management in the zero trust architecture. There's a few others. There's the concept of inventory or cataloging. So along with the feature and the rules, you can also create a tag. And we use tags for different reasons. So a tag, I could say the feature is show a login screen and tag it with QA. And so that tag means that it's, we can group all the features related to QA that QA has to work on, but also we can enable role-based access control to the feature level. Mm-hmm. So that means only QA team members could do something that's related to reading and writing that feature, but nobody else. And so we have that RBAC component. There's also then the ability to start now thinking about tagging features. So just like you tag for RBAC or classifying things, and you're classifying your data in the zero trust architecture world in terms of the risk exposure, you can classify features in terms of the feature risk exposure. So there's no reason why you couldn't have features that are low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And then those, and then if you had a suspicious actor, you could immediately turn off all the high risk features in your application. So it's just kind of a different layer of working with Zero Trust, and not necessarily just at the network level, but at a higher level. And so you, in some cases, would have that double security for Zero Trust support.
Yeah, so at the top you mentioned DevOps, but it sounds like it really supports DevSecOps.
Right. So certainly with DevSecOps, security is a integral part of the DevOps process in government, and it always has been. And there's a lot that can be done with feature management and supporting the security portion of DevSecOps. So one of the things is, just like elite developers want to get to that continuous integration, continuous delivery, or trunk-based development, where they're constantly integrating, constantly deploying features, you don't want that to stop based on a security review. And so feature management, since it decouples that code integration to feature deployment, then it decouples the code integration from the security reviews as well. And so then you don't stop that whole development process for your whole application. Maybe you stop it for a couple detailed reviews of a few features, but it's not going to then throw your whole application timeline out the window.
Right, so it affects the authority to operate process in that sense.
Sure, right.
And earlier you mentioned pizza sales as a possible situation where you need to turn features on and off and so on. What are the fundamental differences, do you think, between commercial use and governmental use of feature management and development?
So it's interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is actually not on the technology side, it's more on the human side. And I do a lot of speaking when it comes to working with the government and trying to, in essence, almost boost their morale. So what I see a lot is that, and I just read a story in an email about the aging government population, and that 30% of the people are due to retire in the next year. And
they've been saying that for 30 years, by the way, but that's okay.
Yeah,
but,
so, well,
they're always there.
So the goal, though, is to attract people, new people, into the government, into government technology, right? And it's hard because you don't always have that really fancy tech stack. You don't have the foosball tables or kombucha drinks, right? And you have mandated deadlines sometimes by law, and so you've got a bunch of people that don't have all the fancy benefits and are under a lot of stress. And so anytime you introduce a technology that makes their lives easier, you'd see a whole team's morale just change completely. So imagine that you're a developer and you're in charge of this whole system. So there's, you build, you operate is like the new thing, right? So if you have to take code from the beginning stages all the way to making sure it continues to run and handling incidents. And if you get that phone call in the middle of the night and you have to wake up and fix some urgent issue as sleep deprived, in the olden days, what you'd have to do is bring out your laptop, try to code something, make sure it works on your laptop, maybe spin up a container and test it out in staging, then get approval to get management to approve it to push to production, and hope that what you did was okay as you were sleep deprived. And that takes a really long time. Even just rolling back to a previous version takes a long time. If you use feature management, you just wake up, you go to the dashboard and you toggle off that feature, and then maybe even go back to bed and deal with it in the morning. So it's just such a relief for the government employees to use something like feature management. It just takes a lot of pressure off. And then they do get those other benefits that I mentioned earlier about just being more productive, not feeling guilty if your code's not working and you're not holding the rest of the team up anymore. So there's just a lot of components that really resonate in the government and less so in the commercial space.
All right, just to wind up here then, it sounds like if you add all of this up, you're helping the government modernize its software development and in many ways its entire approach to the customer experience.
Certainly. So there's a lot of components to modernization. There's the component where people are moving from, say, waterfall methodologies in the DevSecOps space to more agile. And what we see still is maybe with like security reviews, as I said before, something stops that process. And so you don't ever really truly get to agile. You get to something more like Scrumfall as an example. So you want to modernize your CI/CD processes along with all your other processes. And that could include feature management. And another component of modernization is really, when people think of modernization, oftentimes they think about moving from legacy systems to the cloud, right? And then that brings to mind a Kubernetes ecosystem. And I did want to say something about Kubernetes because I do see its value. It's very complex, though, and it's not just all about containers and Kubernetes. It is modernizing your CI/CD pipeline tools as well. And with the modernization, with feature management, like if all you need is a blue-green scenario and zero downtime, you could easily do that with feature management and not even need Kubernetes. So you could also run feature management within a Kubernetes pod too, and have that additional value. But I think that a lot of the government employees that I work with are overwhelmed by Kubernetes, and they choose, once they see, all we wanted to do is not have any downtime at all, then they would go to feature management because you can mitigate an incident right away, you can do a patch forward, you never have to do rollbacks anymore. And so that's modernization enough for them.
All right, sounds like you've given us a lot of great ideas. We've covered a lot of territory. I want to thank you for being with us. Sara Mazer is the Federal Chief Technology Officer at LaunchDarkly. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Industry Exchange Cyber.